The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. Sun Tzu from The Art of War. Hello, I am Emily Maeda. Welcome to Hot Takes on the Classics. You've joined us for our season on war, and I'm joined by Tim McIntosh, who's going to take us through this book, which I'm really excited about. Hey, Tim.
Hi, Emily. Emily, have you read The Art of War before this season on war?
I honestly had not, which was a big lacking in me.
Okay. Well, you're in for a treat. I'm going to start us off. I've got a question for you. So The Art of War, written by Sun Tzu, sometime between 475 and 221 BCE, was translated into French after the book kind of disappeared for several hundred years. Like, especially in the West, nobody was reading Sun Tzu. But then in 1772, it was translated into French by a Jesuit priest. Given that translation background, what famous general do you think might have first employed Sun Tzu's principles in the West?
I'm really excited you asked me that question because I'm going to say, I think it's Napoleon Bonaparte.
100% correct.
Yeah.
You are exactly right.
Yes. Yes.
Given that it was translated in 1772 by a French Jesuit, it's like, that was probably Napoleon. I want to start by talking about, Emily, two things. First, I want to talk about why we're talking about The Art of War, which is a book that came from China, when most of the rest of our selections during this season are from Western civilization. Right. Mm-hmm. And the answer is just very simple. Mm-hmm. We just couldn't ignore The Art of War. Yeah. It's been so impactful, not just in China, not just in the East, but it has been so impactful in the West. So most of our podcasts are concentrating on Western civilization because that's kind of our area of expertise. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while, we will dip into the East when we see real impact in the world. And so...
we should say that's more from our deficiency than from a lack of wonderful
that's
classics.
Exactly right.
But in this case, it is so important to the whole, is we can't talk about war without The Art of War, especially in modern warfare.
Let me talk first about kind of the impact and influence of The Art of War on kind of modern popular life. Bill Belichick, perhaps the greatest NFL coach of all time, has stated repeatedly how much he admires The Art of War.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
That is so funny. In
1987, the movie Wall Street, featuring Gordon Gekko, played by Michael Douglas, frequently refers to The Art of War.
I remember that. That.
It's a story of the stock market and of extreme greed.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Gordon Gekko is kind of the emblematic capitalist who just stomps on everybody in his way to extreme wealth. And of course, he frequently refers to The Art of War. Also, in 2002, the Brazilian football coach Luis Scolari used to take passages from The Art of War and slip it underneath his players' doors at night. And you know what, Emily? It's hard to argue with success. They won the World Cup that year.
So I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that what they find compelling, all three of these people, is the knowledge of the enemy? Is that something that they hone in on, right? Because that's the quote that you took, and that's probably part of what Sun Tzu. Anyway, what do you think?
I think probably knowledge of the enemy. The other thing I suspect is deception. Deception is a huge tactical advantage in warfare. And Sun Tzu is a big proponent of never let your enemy really feel secure in his knowledge about you.
Yeah. Well, hey, that squares with Bill Belichick, doesn't it? And
it
the
does
cheating
square with Bill Belichick.
Scandal, deception.
You just poked the bear in Boston. I'll tell you that right now, Emily. To all of our Boston listeners, let me just send you real quick Emily's email address. No, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Go ahead and do that. Am I wrong? That's the question.
No,
Am I wrong?
You might be right. But you know what? Like any advantage that you can get in professional sports, and you can get away with it. Everybody's doing it. Everybody. I'm not
That's
condoning
without
it.
integrity. Come on. That's without integrity.
It should be about integrity.
Thank
but in that billion-dollar business, people are willing to cut corners.
Come on, John Wooden. Would John Wooden reference The Art of War? Come on.
He probably wouldn't reference I don't know. He might, but I don't think John Wooden would
use
cheat.
Deception. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, back to it.
The Art of War is one of the greatest works, if not the greatest work on strategy ever written. And its style of writing, Emily, is very aphoristic. It's short blurbs. And there's a way, because the principles are so deep, so universal, that they get applied to all sorts of competitive fields, to politics, business, sports, or even the combat-laden arena of dating. Art of War shows up.
I can see that.
I'm going to give you just a few aphorisms to kind of whet your appetite for the Art of War. Here's the first one. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting.
Sounds Confucian, doesn't it? Which would make sense. It sounds Confucian.
We'll talk a little bit more about Sun Tzu's religious convictions a little bit later in the program. Here's a second aphorism. There is no instance of a nation benefiting from prolonged warfare. That's probably still the case. Okay, you know what?
Of course it is still the case. This is still the case.
A question could be raised. We're going to talk about the Romans on another episode. We've talked about them on previous episodes. You could make the case that Rome defended itself into a huge empire. Now, the damage that it did on itself and, of course, on its enemies, but maybe you could make the case Rome in a perpetual state of warfare, maybe they benefited from it because there was so much plunder that came onto the banks of the Italian peninsula. I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I know. I think we shouldn't get off on that, but benefit is, I think, the key word there, right?
Yeah. What does benefit mean?
Yeah, and because the cost to Rome, I think you could make an equally strong case, were far more than what they benefited.
See our conclusion to Virgil's Aeneid, a podcast earlier in this series. Third aphorism from Sun Tzu. When you surround an enemy, leave an outlet free. Do not press a desperate foe too hard.
So interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think I would guess what he's aiming at is that if you press somebody too hard, you will inspire devout resistance, right? I'm assuming. Right.
I mean, the story of the 300 Spartans.
Yes, exactly.
Pressed into a gap, there was no way out, and they took the most courageous stand, and they still lost, but goodness, they
inflicted
what a toll on their enemies.
Yeah, there's the story in the Peloponnesian Wars too, likewise with what town is being sacked, but the same thing. They rise up because there's no way out, so you're going to fight harder.
Backed into a corner.
Yeah.
If you are new to the classics, and this is a podcast on the classics, and you don't have time to read a huge doorstop book like the Iliad or like the Divine Comedy, I recommend Art of War. It's very short. When translated into English, it's only around 45, 46 pages. It's written in aphorisms. They're like these short, bite-sized chunks of text. And you can pick it up and put it down at your leisure.
You could it's not a narrative.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And I really do think that there's all sorts of kind of cross-disciplinary applications. If you're a business person and you have like a competitor for your services business, I think Sun Tzu is really applicable. Let's talk about the book, and then let's talk about Sun Tzu. So the book, very short, is made up of about 13 chapters. Each of those chapters focuses on a different skill or art related to war. It's like a guide to combat strategy, and it's all about how do you motivate soldiers? How do you take advantage of tactical superiority? How do you take advantage of the terrain? These are the sorts of questions that it starts to answer. I think the background around Sun Tzu makes this book really, really interesting. So let me give you a little bit about who he was, and then I'm going to tell you about his time period, the time period that kind of gave rise to this incredible strategic masterpiece. So his birth name was Sun Wu. The name Sun Tzu, that's what he's more popularly known as, is an honorific title meaning master son. He lived during the Zhou Dynasty in China. That's spelled, the Englishized version of it is Z-H-O-U, pronounced Zhou. And that dynasty lasted about 800 years, from 1046 to 256 BC. Okay. Yeah.
I'm just remembering the Zhou dynasty. Isn't this the emperor who's buried with the army?
Oh, is it?
I think it is, based on time.
Can you describe that to our audience, Emily? Because this is like one of the wonders of human creativity.
That hadn't been found until I think 1987. But an emperor was buried with a full army of terracotta figurines. I mean, thank God it wasn't found until 1987, because they would have destroyed it most likely in the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
In the Cultural Revolution, but like an amazing funerary chamber, just amazing. So I think it's the same period, the same dynasty.
Let me tell you a little bit about this dynasty. So they think that Sun Tzu served a king, and his lifetime was 544 to 496 BC. There's a story, maybe apocryphal, but maybe true, about this king. He wanted to put Sun Tzu to a test before he hired him to be his military advisor. So here was the test. He made Sun Tzu train his own harem of 180 concubines so that they could become soldiers. He's like, what? Sun Tzu, if you can do this, if you can train my harem to be soldiers, you've got the job.
Are you serious?
So Sun Tzu is like, serious? Okay, this is the story, Emily. This is the story. He divided the company into basically two companies, soldiers and commanders.
Okay.
And he made two concubines, the king's favorite concubines, into the company commanders. The rest were appointed as foot soldiers.
Of each group.
I think
there's opposing
two
groups.
Concubines, and they each led like a phalanx of other concubines. So Sun Tzu ordered these two concubines, when they were standing at attention, to face right. And do you know how they responded?
Doing what I'm doing?
They
Laughing?
giggled. Exactly.
Yeah.
They laughed. They giggled. So Sun Tzu said that the general, who was in this case himself, was responsible to ensure that the soldiers understood the commands given to them. So he clarified the command to the concubines, and then he stated it again. Turn right. And do you know, Emily? They giggled again. So do you know what Sun Tzu did?
It's bad. I mean, you have to enforce.
Be good.
You have to enforce military hierarchies, right?
Right.
I'm assuming he's going to enforce military hierarchies.
He did, and he commanded their execution.
Oh my gosh.
The king, these are his two favorite concubines. And they're like, he's like, no way. But Sun Tzu persisted. And he explained that if the general soldiers understood his commands, but did not obey, it was their faults as officers. They were the officers, these two concubines. They were executed.
Okay, this is wrong on a variety of levels.
On so many different levels. I know.
This is really
wrong. On so many different levels. He installed two new concubines as officers, and he said, turn right. And do you know what they did?
I'm assuming they turned right. Yeah, they turned right. Wow.
And afterwards,
that's a crazy story.
Both companies who were very aware at this point of the cost of not obeying commands performed their maneuvers flawlessly.
Wow. So he called the king's bluff a little bit. He's like,
did.
Okay, if you're gonna set me up with this, then I'm actually gonna do it, and it's actually gonna cost you.
Right. And it did.
Wow.
But apparently he passed the test. He became the king's advisor.
Okay. I am incorrect on the dynasty. It's the dynasty that follows directly after the Zhou dynasty.
Okay. Still worthy of note.
Mm-hmm.
I want to clarify, before I go into kind of like the nature of warfare in Sun Tzu's day, I want to clarify one thing. When we in the 21st century, and even like when we were in the 20th century, think about war, we think total war.
Yes, we do.
Citizens and soldiers and industry and business, everything in society is participating in the war of one country against another country. But in the history of warfare, that's more the exception rather than the rule. The rule is, I don't know if it's the rule, but more commonly, warfare was practiced among aristocrats.
Right. You send not aristocrats. You want to qualify that, don't you?
Help me qualify that.
But I'm saying a select group, soldiers with aristocratic leaders, right? The generals and they're always leading, but they do have foot soldiers. I mean, that's pretty common.
That's true. They do have foot soldiers.
It's still restricted to a group. It's not total war.
It's confined. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
And it becomes costly to all citizenry because you will have a siege, or you will rape the countryside for food, but not in the sense of like going through the countryside and killing everybody in every village. You're not doing that.
That's right.
Which is total war.
In Sun Tzu's time, war was practiced by aristocrats. Maybe the closest thing we would have in Europe or in the United States was chivalric Europe during the time of the knights. That's the kind of warfare that's being practiced at his time.
The knights are fighting. Like the samurais later in Japan, right?
Right. That's right. So, during Sun Tzu's time, he's part of this big, long, 800-year-long dynasty, the Zhou dynasty. But, and this dynasty is binding several Chinese states together. But now, the dynasty is beginning to decline. So Sun Tzu lives late in this dynasty. The dynasty is beginning to decline. And what happens when a great dynasty that's over several nations or states begins to decline? The states begin to war for supremacy. This always happens, right?
Right, it does.
So, question in Sun Tzu's day is, which of these states is going to get supremacy? Which is going to get control over China? Which is going to be the next great dynasty? Here was the huge problem. Nobody could win. There was just this ongoing warfare between these states, and no state could kind of gain supremacy. Why did they not gain supremacy? This is fascinating. The reason they couldn't gain supremacy is because that traditional behaviors for war, namely moral codes, prevented any state from getting the upper hand. Now, I want to clarify this and just say, like, we would probably agree that moral codes in warfare are a good thing, especially when you think about things like using children as human shields in battle would be forbidden according to many moral codes of warfare, but still some practice that.
Right.
So
I mean, it's been important forever.
It's been important forever. And I'm going to Sun Tzu in a second is going to sound like he's saying no to moral codes in warfare. He's not saying that, but he is going to say, look, war is hell. And if you think that you can kind of like keep this really strict moral code and win your war, you're kind of fooling yourself. So here's an example. 420 BC, China. There's an aristocratic warrior, Hua Bao. He shoots at his enemy and he misses. He misses the shot. So he begins loading up his bow again. And just as he is about to shoot, his friend says, listen, you can't do that. That's not chivalric behavior. The chivalric action would be to allow the enemy to return a shot. So Hua Bao says, you know what? You're right. So he lowers his bow and is shot dead.
Right. Okay. I'm just going to posit something for you.
Please.
Don't we prefer this attitude to war to other iterations? And this happens again and again and again through the history of warfare. I was thinking when he was saying that, I read a book about the establishment of British India, and it actually sounds a whole lot like this because the Indian states had codes about how you fought war, right? And so same thing. You have India, you have a collection of different states. Each one tries to gain supremacy over the other. Nobody's really doing it. And then you have the British come in and the British blow the whole thing up, right? Because they are not doing this like the Indians have been used to doing. But like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to like Sun Tzu because like that chivalric code keeps like violence in check.
Yeah.
So blowing that up is a real problem. I mean,
I know.
So, anyway, but keep going.
So, let me give you another example.
I'm just not sure about this. I'm just not sure about Sun Tzu.
I totally get it. Here's another example. In the Zhou Dynasty, deception was considered a disgrace.
As it should be.
And soldiers would consider deceiving the enemy to not just disgrace themselves, but their ancestral lineage.
Yeah.
Their grandparents and great-grandparents would be ashamed of them being deceptive.
And we have to remember how important that is in the East, which is far more of an honor culture than what we live with it, right?
Right.
I'm thinking of Japanese soldiers in World War II in a different context. But once again, honor was like driving motivation to how they fought.
Absolutely.
Right? So
absolutely.
You can't overestimate or oversell how important this is. Like, isn't that good?
Like
the deception.
What's that?
I said, isn't it good that deception was considered shameful? Like, come on, it's good.
It's on a continuum, Emily, because for you, if your job is to win the war, then deception is a necessary part of warfare.
I know, but boy, the can of worms that's opened. Okay, let's hear.
That's open. So
I mean, come on, you end up getting Bill Belichick if you follow this.
Right. So Sun Tzu, when he's like, okay, deception is considered a moral disgrace on one and one's ancestors. We got to get over it. Here's a quote. All warfare, says Sun Tzu in The Art of War, is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far. When far, we must make the enemy believe we are near.
Yeah.
So as this era goes on, there's this adherence to tradition, which is increasingly frustrating all of these states that can gain no advantage, because each is following the same protocol and employing the same tactics because they've been part of this common dynasty for 800 years.
And they're gentlemen.
They're gentlemen. They have honor.
Yeah, they're fighting war as gentlemen.
So in some ways, Sun Tzu is like, this is overly simplistic, but I'll just say it for the sake of the point, is kind of advocating almost like a guerrilla style warfare.
Right.
Like, let's get over this aristocratic view.
Right.
Let's operate more in terms of what modern people would call like guerrilla warfare.
Doesn't it also remind you of the Revolutionary War and the anger of the British towards the Americans? Because the British are like, hey, we're being gentlemen.
Yeah.
But these Americans, they don't fight like gentlemen. They hide in the forest. They don't wear like the British are wearing red coats. Like they're not blending into the forest, right? But they're treating it like gentlemen.
That's right.
Yeah, they're saying, hey, we're not gonna do whatever. We're going to be gentlemanly in our conduct of this war.
Emily, you have just prefaced my hot take, which I will get to in just a moment.
Okay, don't give it yet.
I'm not going to give it yet. A little bit more about what Sun Tzu believed, or kind of like what his culture believed. So he was born into Taoist culture in China. Tao.
Yeah.
T-A-O, the Tao. So what exactly is the Tao? It's a very big, all-consuming concept. In short, the Tao is the natural order of the universe. When we talk about the Greeks, we'll sometimes talk about the logos, Logos, as kind of like the rationality of the natural order, like the shape of the natural order. Well, this is a very similar concept that's from the East, developed in the East. It is a rich, deep, religious, philosophical view of the world. And the goal is for a Taoist is to live in harmony with nature.
With revealed reality, right? I mean, more than
That's
just,
right. That's right. So there's a belief in the law of unity of two opposites, kind of popular yin-yang. So the words originally yin-yang meant sunshine and shade. So you can see there's a unity in opposites, sunshine and shade. Both are caused in a common unified source, the sun. We only have shade when sunlight is blocked. And without sunlight, there is no such thing as shade. There's a unity of opposites there. So why is this important to understanding Sun Tzu's book? Because he's not an advocate for war. He thinks that war is the absolute disruption of the natural order of the universe. It's like an assault upon the Tao. It's terrible. It is the last of all resorts. Excuse me, it is the last resort. And he is really clear in The Art of War that every effort through diplomacy we should try to achieve peace through diplomacy, and we should try and try and try. And it is only when diplomacy has reached an absolute impasse that we go to war. Here's a quote. Go ahead, Emily.
No, read the quote and then I have a little reflection.
The supreme art of war, says Sun Tzu, is to subdue the enemy without fighting. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle.
So his sun and shade, the sun and shade as seen in the Tao, he would then say that if you do have to go to war, you should try to make it as short as possible, which is the reason that he argues you should not have these silly moral codes that prolong war, because a prolonged war is, you should try to end the war as quickly as possible.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so you can hear it in that
I'm with him on
quote,
that. I'm with him on that.
If you're going to go to war, it has to be absolute and complete, because you've used all diplomacy at your disposal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got to go to war. Let's make it as quick as possible, and it needs to be victory.
Mm-hmm. You know, another war that sort of fits his nobody benefits by a long war is the Peloponnesian Wars. He's right. The Peloponnesian Wars,
they just
right?
Dragged out.
They go on for how many years? 20 years, right? And everybody is devastated at the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
During the Vietnam War, some Viet Cong officers extensively studied the art of war and apparently could recite entire passages from it.
Interesting.
General
that makes
Douglas
sense.
MacArthur. It does make sense.
It does make sense.
Douglas MacArthur said that he kept a copy of The Art of War on his desk.
Interesting.
And I'm gonna conclude before my hot take with this. Colin Gray is a retired military officer. He was a U.S. Marine, served as an analyst in Pentagon, kind of famous in strategy circles. He had a maxim about military strategy. Here's his maxim. If Thucydides, Sun Tzu, and Clausewitz did not say it, probably is not worth saying.
Is he wrong? He's not wrong.
He's not wrong. And we're going to read Clausewitz a little bit later in this series on war.
Exciting. We'll cover all three of them.
We will cover all three of them.
So anybody who wants to fight a war should be well able to do that based on this season. Let's hope not,
Emily,
though.
it's time for my hot take.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, here's my hot take. Okay, Emily, I'm going to kind of fumble this out. We're in kind of swampy moral territory whenever we're talking about war.
It's true.
Here's the dilemma. I'm just going to state the dilemma. The dilemma is usually that the established power during the time of the Revolutionary War in the United States, it was Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
The established power wants rules and codes behind war because they tend to support the established power.
Interesting.
And it is the smaller, maligned tribe, nation, people group who are always inventing new ways to do warfare that subvert the kind of honor codes of existing warfare.
Yeah.
That's the dilemma, I think, that war is kind of like war between unequal powers is always going to present.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And finding like a moral compass in that dilemma is extremely difficult, because of this dilemma that the existing power wants to do traditional warfare and the smaller power is always kind of reinventing warfare and necessarily subverting like any sort of honor code or moral rules of warfare. That's the dilemma of war. That's like one of the chief dilemmas of war.
It is. You're right. And I will agree with Sun Tzu that war should be kept as short as possible. Nobody benefits from a long war. That's
Emily,
awesome.
We've reached the end of another episode. I pick up a copy of Sun Tzu, put it in some place where you can pick it up and put it down. It's a great read. Translators, I think, good translations do a good job of keeping the kind of elegance of Sun Tzu's writing. It's a pleasure to read. And there's, like I said, lots of crossover between different disciplines.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Clark Stefanik, our producer. Thanks also to True North, our platform. If you like this show, look up some of the other podcasts on the True North platform. And as always, thank you to Tom Hagerman, who wrote and performed our music.